Hello and good morning and welcome back to New Day here on TV3. Now we're talking about workplace conflict or conflict resolution, and to assist with this particular conversation, with me in the studio I have Mr. Benjamin Arthur, who's an alternative dispute resolution practitioner and also a lecturer at the Institute of Paralegal Training and Leadership Studies. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Let's establish some definitions first off. What would you define as conflict?
Thank you very much. Conflict, to the lay person, let me just come down to the lay person. It's when there's an expressed disagreement or when there's an irreconcilable interest or goals, needs, or wants. So what I'm trying to say is that when two or more people have disagreement as to their values, as to their goals, interests, or expectations, and is expressed, then we term it as conflict.
Okay.
In some other circles, others have come out with definitions talking about internal conflict. What it means that within the individual, there could also be conflict. But I think for purposes of this discussion, we will leave that one and talk about the interpersonal, intergroup, and the rest.
Great, because what we want to concentrate on is workplace conflict. So what would you class as workplace conflict then?
Workplace conflict basically is the conflict at the workplace.
So it's just logistical issues, just taken away from one area into another.
Yes, but what makes workplace conflict a bit special is that most of the methods we have known to deal with conflict, some of them are not very appropriate when it comes to workplace conflict.
Right.
The key ingredient here is that most of the times at the workplace conflict, within a workplace conflict, the parties are interdependent. What it means is that there is a need for them to work together. So if you want to handle such conflict, you don't just apply any method at all as if you are probably on another field.
Right, understood.
So there's a need to
so what are the causes? What causes workplace conflict?
There are many causes and triggers. I'm mentioning causes and triggers because we have contributing factors. You can have a conflict that could be complex issues that brought the conflict. So we might not in every situation point to one issue, but there could be an aggregate of issues, but we could have structural causes. When I say structural causes, conflict emanating from institutional organization or arrangement. You and I, let's say in TV3, if we are employees here, we could have conflict because of certain arrangement that the producer or our job description could give us. It could be an overlapping responsibility. So we have structural conflict. Then we can have conflict that is also based on competition for resources. We can also have conflict based on competing values. We can have conflict also coming out of probably misinformation or lack of appropriate data. So we could mention
there are various
and mention.
Okay. Let's get to resolution of conflict. How we deal with these kind of conflicts within working environment. Because like you said,
let me make a statement. When it comes to dealing with conflict at the workplace, especially in our public sector, it's very crucial. What I would recommend is that there is a need to begin to decentralize what we have for the National Labour Commission. What it means is that at the workplace, there are certain conflicts that we do not have to necessarily have to go and see National Labour Commission. Let's say in Tamale Teaching Hospital, let's say during the work, a nurse on duty is, say, slapped by a patient. Where is the National Labour Commission in that place to deal with the matter? Where are the administrative grievances procedures that they have there to deal with the matter? So first of all, in order to deal with workplace conflict, we must have an internal mechanism first. One of them can be administrative grievance structure. We can also have equal employment opportunity where when there are discriminatory issues, it could be reported right there and then.
Okay,
deal with
I don't want to cut you off, but I'm sorry, I'm going to, because I mean the environments that we're talking about now are environments where maybe you yourself, work in an office environment, something very structured. But if we're talking about conflict resolution in the workplace, it's not always as structured as this. For instance, I gave an example earlier. If two fitters are fighting in a mechanic's yard, how do you resolve that conflict? Because there is no internal structure for that.
If they don't have an internal structure, the first thing is that the fitters, as part of their training, I don't want to talk about the very little issues. I want to talk about the broader issues. As part of their apprenticeship, there is a need to ingrain in them the need to cooperate and to see the beach, not the grain of sand.
Right.
What it means is that at the workplace, they have a shared responsibility to make it harmonious,
right,
to make it a conducive atmosphere for work. So if they have been trained with this mindset, conflict is inevitable, but at least they will understand the dynamics of it, how it should be used in improving the system, rather than just putting themselves down, killing themselves or hurting themselves. There will be the need. Wherever we have the garages, I'm just limiting myself to the fitting shop.
Yeah.
The officers there or the leaders there must know that conflict is inevitable. So once we can identify a leadership structure in any work environment, then we must also incidentally or mechanically, just to borrow that term, we need to also institute a conflict resolution mechanism in that place. We may have to begin with training the people to deal with their own issues, especially conflict that is not too serious. They can talk about it. If it goes beyond them, then they will need a third party to step in.
A mediator.
A mediator or an arbitrator for that matter. In Ghana, we have very fine laws when it comes to conflict resolution in the private sector and in the public sector as well. What we need to do is to begin to do public education. We need to be training people who are at the front of our industrial relations in this country to begin to imbibe in them that conflict management or resolution is crucial. Let me give us a simple example. If you remember the STS housing deal, we gave the people our sovereign guarantee. Drawings were done. I'm sure they paid for the drawings. Offices were acquired. A cup of tea or so might have been shared. But let me call this common boardroom wrangling made sure that today, as we speak, we could not have a block on another block forming a foundation or what we might call it.
Okay.
So it tells you that it's very crucial, and workplace conflict can be very costly. Sometimes we don't ingrain it into our budget.
Now you're answering questions before I ask them, because I was going to ask you what are some of the disadvantages or what are some of the issues that arise from continuous workplace conflict?
Okay. Let me disabuse our minds that it's not every conflict at the workplace that is dysfunctional.
That's right.
Sometimes some of them are letters to institutional reforms or maybe structural failure. But to the large extent, it is costly. A typical example is, let's say, in the newspaper room or in the editorial room, there is the need for me as the sub-editor, if I've mentioned the right position, to give you, the editor, the right information to do your work. But because you and I, as two handsome men, maybe there's a young lady somewhere who has crossed our path, and for that reason, this is not related to work,
to the job.
But you and I don't agree. So the very information that I need to pass on to you, I am not giving it to you. So it makes your work a bit difficult, and it could be a calculated attempt to sabotage you. As you and I keep on fighting, we will begin to produce results that bring the media house down.
Right.
And eventually we become uncompetitive.
Right.
Eventually you and I, our salaries will begin to go down. Our motivation will begin to go down.
Yep.
And we will begin to complain. And we may even strike for that reason. So it's costly. Apart from the health implications, it has monetary issues. And sometimes it borders on productivity and performance. So maybe there's a need to also begin to accept models in calculating cost of conflict at the workplace. There are often times that there is a need to work around some people. If you're a manager in a workplace and you realize that 2 people under you are not working well because of interpersonal conflict, there are times you have to redesign their jobs to let them work around each other. But if you have to go to Tetekwashi and there is this route from here, when I say from here, I'm referring to Sankara, Akwaje interchange, direct to Tetekwashi, and because there is a blockade, you have to go and use Jowulu and go around. Isn't it costly?
Yes.
It's costly, it's time consuming. So we have to pay particular attention to workplace conflict. Okay. It's putting out all of us down.
Now, we've already established that obviously it's very important. It can affect us in regards to productivity and our effectiveness in the workplace. Culturally, we are very challenged when it comes to conflict resolution. The utterances that we make, even on a day-to-day basis, can be seen or deemed as threatening and be very derogatory. So how do we balance culture and these processes? Because culturally, we've always seen the CEO as the be-all and end-all of the company. He can say and do what he wants, but really and truly, nowadays, with the emergences of the West, we realize that that's not completely and utterly acceptable. So where do we draw the line? Where do we take our culture and where we've come from, and where do we take the West and what the new processes are going forward?
Thank you. Interestingly, culturally, we have had a very structured dispute resolution mechanisms, and the white have copied it from us. When we talk of ADR, right from our marriages, in our communal spirit,
I would disagree with you on that, because it's always been a case of do what I say, not what I do.
I'm coming to the workplace. I'm coming to the workplace.
Okay, bring it. Let's
conflict. So, from our cultural background, we have a very good appreciation of dispute resolution. What we have failed to do as a nation is that we have not brought those skills to the workplace. Don't forget that we have inherited colonial mechanistic industrial relations mechanisms in this country, and there is a need to reform it. When you are a manager or a CEO, the first question you have to ask yourself is the stakeholders or the owners of the company or the organizations, the workers and the clients, which category is most important to you? Your orientation as to which category is most important to you will begin to help you treat the people the way you have to treat them. For example, if you see the workers as your internal clients that you need to collaborate or to cooperate with to satisfy the external clients, then definitely you will begin to look at them as special clients also. Then any other thing you need to do with them, not to them, with them, in an atmosphere of cooperation to get the best of results, you'll be doing so. So what I'm trying to deal with is the structural issues. There's a need to reorient our minds at the workplace. In Ghana, sorry to say, oftentimes we see workers as liability instead of assets. So it is very easy to talk about redundancy and not talk about productivity. It's very easy to pay people and fail to match it with remuneration and productivity. So it's the orientation at the workplace. We must also begin to see the workplace as a formal place that needs to be structured. I'm not going to say that only structured organizations work best, but even if it's not too well structured, at least once 2 or people are working together, workplace conflict is inevitable. So we better deal with it. Just like the way we buy toothpaste and toothbrush, we must begin to treat conflict resolution at the workplace as such.
How important is communication from senior levels all the way down when it comes to conflict resolution?
You've mentioned a very key issue in Ghana when it comes to our industrial relations, and I want to refer to the Labour Act 651 of 2003. And as part of the responsibilities of every employer, and if you don't mind, I don't know if we have time on our side, it talks about, let me just quote it. It talks about the employer having the duty to open channels of communication. So the old mechanistic system that we had, where you have to move from down to top, now there is multi-directional information flow. And the Labour Act also gives us freedom of information, especially at the workplace. So there is a need to open channels of communication. In fact, if the channels of communications are not open, cooperation will be stifled. Okay. If channels are not open for communication, how would you have negotiation in good faith? How would you work together? How can you collaborate to move the common agenda of letting the business fare well? You cannot do that. Okay. So it's not even an option, it's an imperative.
Good point. Okay, now let me step outside. Well, we're going to keep it in the work environment, however, not work related.
You are free to step outside.
We're going to stay in the same place, but we're not going to keep it work related. How do we resolve conflicts when it comes to things that don't involve our particular job, i.e., religion, politics, beliefs, ethics, morals, those kind of things? Because on a day-to-day basis, you're going to speak to people, interact with people within the workplace, and it's not always going to be work related.
I thank you very much again. When it's not work related and it is based on religion and then maybe politics, there is an issue that we call the common interest. What is the common interest? Once you can identify a common interest, once you can identify the need for harmony, then there is the need for a conflict to be managed. But I want to speak to this issue not only from the conflict perspective, from the peace and security perspective, and then from the human rights perspective. In the broader sense of society, there is a need to delink one's freedom from the other. So what I'm trying to say is that where your freedom ends is where mine begins. Yeah. In other words, there is a need to have harmony in society. From the developmental point of view, harmony and peace is like the seat upon which development sits. So if we look from the religious point of view, there is the need to have harmony. From the politics, there is a need to have harmony. So we cannot say that we can't afford to have a structure. So in Ghana, thanks be to God, we have a peace architecture which is embodied in the National Peace Council. What we have failed to do is that we have not decentralized it. So already we have some of these mechanisms. There's another thing that we shouldn't lose sight of, that our chieftaincy institution for many years have been very instrumental in helping us resolve conflict, especially at the communal level. In our cities, we don't really mind the importance of chiefs. But if you go to our small towns, the chiefs are very instrumental in helping resolve dispute. We could begin to use the abilities of the chiefs. They derive their power from their resources and their knowledge and their control and power. So we could begin to use them. It's very important. I don't want to be very particular. We don't have the time to
go into
the fine greens.
Because I think there's a lot underlying issue with that. Because obviously, in going to certain people to resolve conflict, you have to have trust in them. You have to know that this person is looking out for the better interest of all the parties that are involved in the conflict, whether that be a chief, spiritual leader.
Yeah, can I be quick in adding this?
Go ahead, quickly.
When it comes to our judicial service, we also have an ADR program where any issue that you send to the court, once it is not an aggravated crime, once it doesn't border on constitutional issues or national security matters, it could be referred to an ADR practitioner. It's court connected to deal with the issue. So we have some of these systems. So next time when you take your issue to court, it's especially civil cases, don't waste your time. Just ask for ADR option and you'll be served well.
All right. I want to thank you so much for coming in this morning. This has been Mr. Benjamin Arthur. He is an alternative dispute resolution practitioner, lecturer, Institute of Paralegal Training and Leadership Studies as well. Thank you so much for coming in this morning. And this segment has been brought to you by Lipton Tea, and we'll be back in just a few moments with my co-host, Amakia Bebrese.